The alley behind the old bakery in Branswick was quiet that morning, with only the gentle rustling of leaves and the occasional clink of metal from the bins breaking the silence. It was there that I first noticed her, a thin, weary tabby with tired eyes, carefully watching over a single kitten that stumbled awkwardly between the shadows. She looked worn, as if she had poured every bit of her energy into keeping that little one alive. I crouched behind a stack of crates, feeling unsure about whether to approach or stay where I was. Something in her gaze made me hesitate. She wasn't fleeing, but she wasn't asking for help either. The next day, I returned with a can of wet food and a folded blanket tucked into my satchel. The bakery's back lot had a familiar scent of flour dust mixed with rust, and as I stepped around the broken pallet where I had seen her, I half expected they might be gone. But there she was, in the same spot, her tail curled snugly around her body, her eyes tracking my every move. The little kitten had somehow climbed onto the lowest rung of a crooked wooden ladder, its paws appearing too large for its tiny legs. Sitting cross-legged a few feet away, I carefully opened the can. The sound made her flinch. Not run away, but flinch. It was as though she remembered what the noise of metal meant. I placed the food down and remained still. She waited, and after 5 minutes, the kitten's nose began to twitch, curiosity overcoming its caution. It wobbled toward the tempting smell, making those soft, squeaky sounds that only very young creatures can manage. The mother didn't stop it, but she also didn't follow. Her gaze remained focused on me. I started calling her Mara and the kitten Lint, since he always seemed to be covered in bits of fluff and leaves. In the following days, I returned at the same time with food and my blanket. Mara never touched any of it, but Lint did. He ate, played, and even fell asleep in my lap once, leading me to wonder, maybe this would work out. Yet Mara remained distant. She never moved closer and didn't run away, either. She just sat there, watching silently, and that stillness was more unsettling than if she had hissed at me. By the end of the week, Lint had become a lively little creature, darting out the moment he heard my voice, purring so hard he hiccuped. He would crawl into my arms, bat at my fingers, and even curl up to sleep against my boot. He was too small to grasp that the world could be unkind. Mara, however, stayed like a formidable barrier. She sat beneath the rusted scaffolding, always maintaining a distance just out of my reach. She never ate the food I left for her, though a few times I returned the next morning to find the plate empty and paw prints in the dirt, suggesting she was keeping a careful watch. I couldn't be sure it was her. It might have been a raccoon. Or perhaps she only ate when no one was around. One afternoon, I decided to bring my friend Claire along. She had more experience with feral animals than I did, and I thought her perspective could be useful. But as soon as Claire approached, Mara darted halfway up the scaffold, looking down at us as if we were breaking some unwritten rule. Lint paused his paw swipe, frozen in place, watching her. "She's not going to come over," Claire observed. "Not like he will." "Should we think about trapping her?" I asked, instantly uncomfortable with how that sounded. Claire shrugged. "It depends. Are you planning to save both of them, or just the one that wants help?" Her question struck me. I hadn't considered it that way before, but perhaps I should have. Now I was left unsure of what to think. Early one morning, I discovered a small patch of blood smeared on the edge of the wooden pallet where Mara usually slept. Lint was nowhere to be found, nor was she. I crouched down, my heart racing, scanning the alley as if I were piecing together a mystery. My hands trembled as I whispered their names softly. After about 10 minutes, Lint appeared, limping and with a fresh scratch down his side. I quickly scooped him up and held him close. He trembled against me but didn't make a sound. He just clung on tightly. But Mara was still missing. I left out food and water, then took Lint to the vet. Thankfully, he didn't need stitches. He just required a cleaning and some antibiotics. "Looks like he got swiped at," the vet explained. "Could be another stray. Sometimes a mother can get aggressive when her kittens become too independent." Those words lingered in my mind. I didn't want to think Mara would hurt her own kitten, but the timing was troubling. Had Lint gotten too close to me? Was she trying to push him away? That evening, I returned with Lint wrapped in a towel. He chirped softly when he saw the alley. I gently set him down. From the shadows, Mara stepped out, slow and watchful, her gaze fixed on me. I instinctively took a step back. She moved closer to Lint and hissed, a low, sharp sound that echoed in the night. Then she turned and vanished back into the scaffold. I picked him up again. It suddenly dawned on me. Maybe she didn't want him back. That night was restless. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling while the clock ticked away in the kitchen. Beside me, Lint stretched in his sleep, blissfully unaware of the rift that had formed in his little world. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see her, Mara, moving in that peculiar, almost ghostly way. It wasn't curiosity or concern that drove her. It felt more ancient and distant. She had looked at him and then through him, directly at me, and in that moment, I recognized something I had been avoiding. That hiss wasn't a sign of fear. Instead, it felt final, like her way of saying, "This one is yours now." The morning light did nothing to ease the heaviness in my chest. I wrapped Lint in a towel and took him down to the bakery steps, hoping that the fresh air might clear my mind. He nestled against me, blinking up at the cheerful sounds of birds, his little paws twitching as if he were dreaming of chasing them. Claire arrived just as the wind picked up, her coat flapping behind her and hands tucked in her pockets. She glanced at me, and I could tell she sensed something was off. When I managed to speak, my voice felt weak. I mentioned that I thought Mara had let him go. Claire didn't disagree. Instead, she simply replied, "Or maybe she thinks you already took him." The truth lingered between us, heavy and unspoken. Lint seemed to blend into our indoor life as if he had been waiting for this all along. He curled up in my arms, squeaked when I stepped away, and chirped in delight when I returned. Still, each evening I felt the pull to return to the alley. Mara was usually there, watching from beneath the scaffold, her gaze unwavering and her body still. She didn't eat or show any signs of emotion. She was distant, like a figure behind glass, observing what had once belonged to her slip away into a life she no longer chose to be part of. That week, the rain fell hard, drenching the alley before I could even turn the corner. I stood under my umbrella, looking at the makeshift shelter I had created days before. A cracked plastic crate turned on its side, with a towel draped over it and a brick weighing one end down. It was meant to be a temporary gesture, a way to let Mara know she hadn't been forgotten. Now, though, it sagged under the weight of the storm, one corner of the towel already ripped and fluttering like a white flag. Mara wasn't where she usually was. I called her name softly, even though I knew she had never responded before, but I called out anyway. A moment later, I caught a glimpse of her eyes, just the eyes, low against the ground, sparkling from a gap in the scaffold. She had found a dry spot to stay, tucked away, still alone. I let out a breath, feeling both relieved and uneasy. Mr. Halvers, the bakery owner, stepped outside while I was crouched there. He glanced at the damp shelter I had made, then looked at me and shook his head. "You can't keep feeding them here," he said, his tone firm yet not unkind. "One cat turns into 5, then 10. Customers start to complain. You understand." I felt an impulse to argue, to clarify that it wasn't really like that. Yet I held back, knowing how it must appear, me, drenched, kneeling in an alley, talking to a shadow that wouldn't even respond to my calls. That night, I sat on the floor with Lint, the only light filtering in from the street lamp outside, casting flickering golden shadows. He curled up beside me, one paw resting lightly on my wrist as he twitched in his dreams. I watched his tiny chest rise and fall, pondering whether he remembered her or if he was already starting to forget. That thought troubled me deeply because I hadn't forgotten her, not even a little. Part of me felt the urge to return to that alley with a trap, to bring Mara in and try to keep her safe, even if she hated it. But then a quieter thought crept in. Maybe she doesn't want to be rescued. Maybe she just needs her own space. And so I found myself at a crossroads, unsure of which path to take. Am I truly helping her by staying close, or am I just hurting her by refusing to let go? Lint's soft purring broke the silence, and I stayed there with him, my hand resting on his back, feeling my heart drift between two lives that could never again be one. By the 8th day, the alley felt different. It wasn't anything obvious, no broken glass or signs of a struggle, but the atmosphere had changed, as if the silence were thicker now. The food I left out had gone untouched for 2 nights in a row, and the towel in the crate was barely disturbed, still damp. Even the scent in the air had shifted, less cat and more mildew, as if her presence had simply faded away. I lingered that evening longer than usual. The streetlights flickered on above me, casting pale circles on the puddles below. The bakery was closed, and the alley felt empty. I called her name yet again, not because I expected a response, but because I couldn't bear the thought of her slipping away without a word. But Mara didn't come. I noticed one of her paw prints halfway down the alley wall, smudged and faint, but clearly there. It was high enough to show she had climbed, higher than I'd ever seen her go. Lint meowed softly from inside my coat, wriggling a little. I held him close and glanced up at the narrow rooftop above the scaffolding. There was nothing there, no movement, no glimmer of eyes. Yet something shifted in my chest. This wasn't just silence. It felt like something was missing, as if she had chosen to leave. Not an escape, not panic, just a deliberate decision. She had gone, and the strange ache in my stomach wasn't just worry. It was the realization that she might not return. The days began to blend together. The alley remained quiet, the crate untouched, and the scaffolding stood still as if waiting for a show that would never start. I kept checking back, returning often, sometimes with Lint bundled up inside my coat, sometimes by myself. Each visit made the absence of her feel more weighty, not only because she was gone, but because her space still felt like hers. I'd find myself glancing at rooftops and fire escapes, hoping to catch a glimpse of her familiar tabby fur or the outline of her ears against the sky. But there was nothing, just shadows and silence. Meanwhile, Lint was thriving. He played like every day was an adventure, chasing after bottle caps across the living room floor and climbing over couch cushions like they were mountains. At night, he'd curl up on my chest, purring so deeply that it felt like my heartbeat was tied to his. His trust came easily, and his affection was unwavering. He didn't flinch at loud noises, and he slept peacefully through the night. He was happy, safe, and whole. Yet in the midst of my joy, there lingered a quiet guilt. I often wondered what Lint might be forgetting: the scent of her fur, the rhythm of her footsteps, the sound of her grooming him, or how she would wrap around him when it got cold. I began to question if forgetting was a kind of mercy. Would remembering only break something in him that he didn't yet have words for? I loved him for who he was becoming, but a part of me mourned the loss of the connection they once shared. In a complicated way, I found myself growing to appreciate her more for choosing to leave. Staying would have been easier, and somehow she knew better than both of us. It was a Tuesday when Claire called. I hadn't seen her in days. She asked if I had made any decisions about Lint. Her tone was careful, almost as if she expected I hadn't figured it out yet. I replied that I didn't need to make a choice right away. Lint was safe with me, he was growing, and he had become a part of my life. But after a moment of silence, she reminded me that the shelter had reached out again. They had a spot available for him, but it wouldn't be held forever. Hanging up, I felt my heart racing, a flicker of resentment igniting within me. It wasn't Claire I was upset with, it was the timing, the pressure I felt to define what had, until now, just existed without expectation. Later that evening, as I cleaned Lint's food bowl and felt the cool kitchen tiles under my bare feet, I noticed him gazing out the window. His small face pressed against the glass, eyes focused on something beyond my view. Perhaps it was just a breeze rustling the leaves, or maybe it was nothing at all. Yet something about his stillness, the way he held his ears and the fleeting motion of his tail, brought an unexpected wave of emotion. He was still connected to something beyond his comprehension, and I began to question if I truly had the right to keep him here with me. That night, sitting on the floor with him, nestled against my chest, I composed an email to the shelter. I chose not to send it. Instead, I let the words linger, waiting for a sign, for her, or perhaps for some clarity I was starting to doubt would ever arrive. Meanwhile, outside, the alley remained quiet, still hers, still empty, still uncertain. The week brought a brittle sky, thin clouds stretching like delicate threads across a dull gray backdrop. The wind carried the familiar scent of late autumn, whispering change long before the trees could catch up. I found myself in the alley one last time. The crate lay empty, knocked over, likely by a gust of wind or a curious raccoon. I didn't fix it. I simply stood there, letting the cold seep into my arms, almost hoping to delay what was inevitable. Back home, Lint greeted me at the door as he always did, his head tilted, paws softly tapping across the floor, a tiny chirp escaping him. I scooped him up and buried my face in the soft fur beneath his chin. He purred without hesitation, instinctively. It felt as if he had learned to trust me without question and loved me without a past. Perhaps that was the part I found most admirable about him. Later that night, Claire visited. She stood in my kitchen, a stack of blankets tucked under one arm, holding an expression that suggested she was aware of the fragile nature of the situation. "If you need some time or space, I can take him," she said gently. But I shook my head, and I think I surprised both of us when I said, "I already know." The words slipped out before I had a chance to fully understand them. I realized I could no longer pretend that being stuck between choices was the same as actually making one. I glanced at Lint, who was perfectly content batting at a string on the floor, completely unaware of the turmoil in my mind. I muttered softly, more to myself than to Claire, "I just don't know if knowing helps." That night, I didn't really sleep. I drifted through confusing dreams, endless corridors, the sound of Mara's hiss echoing in empty spaces, and Lint crying somewhere I couldn't reach. I woke before dawn, the world outside still wrapped in a heavy blue quiet. Lint was curled against my side, twitching softly, a small but sturdy presence, stronger than he had been in that alley. I stared at the ceiling, counting the seconds between my breaths, and it began to sink in. I couldn't keep him just because I felt guilty, nor could I give him up simply because I feared the weight of that guilt. Whatever choice I made carried its own burden. I thought about Mara and how intentional she had been. She never fought me or begged. She just observed, calm and regal, as her kitten entered another world. Maybe that was her choice. Perhaps she left him with me because she understood something I hadn't yet grasped, that while we might not belong to each other, Lint and I did. But keeping him wasn't without its price. Every decision comes with a cost. Letting him go meant living with endless questions. Keeping him meant carrying the part of her that might never forgive me. In that quiet hour, I realized the choice wasn't about what I wanted. It was about what I could live with. Before the sun even rose above the rooftops, I stood up, walked into the kitchen, and picked up the phone. For a long moment, I just held it, not dialing or moving, simply breathing. I existed between two futures that would never fully separate. The shelter was on the outskirts of town, hidden behind an old warehouse, its sign gently swaying in the breeze. I don't recall the drive there. I remember the silence in the car, Lint pacing in his crate, then curling up and going still, as if he sensed the change in his surroundings. It wasn't dangerous, just unfamiliar. Off. Inside, the woman at the counter greeted me with a gentle smile. It wasn't bright or filled with optimism. It was more a recognition of shared sorrow, as if she understood the weight of what I was experiencing. With trembling hands, I handed her the paperwork. In a crate nearby, Lint sat still, his wide eyes reflecting uncertainty. I knelt beside him, unlatched the door, and let my fingers lightly touch the top of his head. He didn't pull away or show distress, but when he pressed his face into my palm, I felt my resolve weaken, just enough to sting. The woman stepped closer. "If you're unsure, you don't have to." Yet I nodded quietly. I had to follow through, not because my feelings for him had faded, but because they remained strong. Some stories don't need to end in the same place they began. Mara understood that well. She had chosen to leave without expecting me to grasp her choice, and now it was my moment to act in kind, even if it felt like an unnamable loss. As I stood to leave, I didn't look back. It wasn't that I didn't want to. It was simply that I feared glancing back might change everything. Outside, the wind gently tugged at my coat, and I envisioned her above the alley once more, watching, eerily still. Not angry, just observing. Weeks went by, and the house felt quieter than I remembered. The crate was gone, and the toys were stored away in a box that I had avoided. Some mornings, I still reached instinctively to check the corner of the bed, half expecting the comforting weight of a sleeping body. But now, only the remnants of routine echoed back, habits formed around a presence that was no longer there. I still find myself visiting the alley from time to time. It's a blend of habit and hope. There's no sign of Mara, no flicker of her striped fur among the shadows. Yet I know she's out there, She was never one to require visibility to exist. She belonged to the spaces in between, the ledge outside the window, the quiet moments of passing steps, and the choices made silently, away from the gaze of others. I'm uncertain if I made the right choice. Perhaps there wasn't a definitive one. But I carry this decision with me, the weight of it, the mixed feelings, the sorrow. Occasionally, I can still hear the faint sound of little paws on the wooden floor or feel the warmth of a memory nestled close to my chest. The hurt hasn't lessened, but it's become clearer. If my journey in rescue has taught me anything, it's that not all connections are meant to last. Some are meant to be cherished, even as they drift away. And somewhere out there, I like to think she knows. Some stories don't conclude the way we wish they would. They linger and resonate, often leaving us with more questions than answers. This can be part of the reality of true rescue. It's not always about fixing something or claiming it. Sometimes it's about simply being present, offering unconditional love, and learning to let go, even when it's difficult. If this story resonates with you, consider what it feels like to carry the weight of an unspoken goodbye. Have you faced a situation where the choice was less about right or wrong, and more about what seemed necessary? I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments, and if you feel that even the quietest stories deserve attention, think about subscribing. There's much more to discover together, more lives, more voices, and those moments in between that often go unnoticed. As we move forward, let's make space for what remains unresolved. Embrace the love found in what doesn't last. And remember to listen closely. Sometimes, silence can speak volumes.